Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon whenever you're listening to this. So this series of videos is going to help you go through some of the information from prior units that you still will need to be aware of and responsible for meeting graduation standards in this class and for being ultimately successful in U.S. history. So we're going back to one of the first lessons, the 1.03 Peopling the Americas lesson. And I'm going to briefly go through some of the highlights and the important information and the standards to know from this first lesson. Just reading the introduction, it's called Peopling the Americas. More than 12,000 years ago, nomadic hunters migrated from Asia into North America. By 1492, when Columbus landed in the Bahamas, North and South America were home to millions of inhabitants. These first Americans had formed diverse cultures and societies as they adapted to different environments. And this is just the directions telling you the various points of this lesson. And let's first look at this animation showing from Asia to the Americas. This is just a nice little visual to show you how the North American continent became populated. So here we have over on the left in Asia the nomadic hunter-gatherers and some of the animals that they were hunting. And it says more than 12,000 years ago, during the last ice age, Siberia and Alaska were one continuous landmass. So that's what we're looking at right here. Here's Alaska. This is the area of Siberia over here and how they were all connected. Okay, one giant landmass that modern geologists call Beringia. Animals such as the mastodon, woolly mammoth, and saber-toothed cat began migrating across Beringia in search of food. And here we see them moving. Small bands of hunters and gatherers moved east following the animals, the source of their food, clothing, and shelter. Over time, as more people arrived from Asia, Beringia became crowded. Animal populations began to decrease and some animals continued to migrate east into North America. As the animal moves further east into present-day Alaska and northern Canada, people followed. Eventually the ice melted, the seas rose, and the Beringia landmass disappeared underwater. As you can see, look at that, all water now in between Russia and the United States, or Alaska. The nomadic bands that had migrated into North America slowly spread across the continent and eventually into South America. As you can see, that is what the widely accepted belief is how people colonized the North American continent before European involvement. Okay, so let's go through the lesson reading here. Our knowledge of the first peoples to arrive in the Americas has changed over time with the discovery of new evidence. Though many questions remain unanswered, most archaeologists, biologists, and other scientists agree that more than 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, nomadic hunters and seafarers migrated from Asia to the Americas. And we see the lines here showing the population distribution. Archaeologists call these earliest people in the Americas Paleo-Indians. Excavations have produced several kinds of evidence of their lives, including tools such as spear points to indicate what kind of hunting they did. Spear points, obviously, you were not going to be using spears to cut down vegetables. You were using them to hunt animals. Over time, these nomadic hunters spread throughout North and South America. Eventually, about 7,000 years ago, people of Mesoamerica, the region in Northern America, including much of Mexico and Central America, learned to plant some kinds of corn or maize and became farmers. Able to stay in one place and support large numbers of people, they formed villages and later cities. So going from nomadic hunters to congregating in one area, in a village or later cities. Most early people in the area that is now the United States and Canada had no need for farming. They could hunt and gather without depleting the resources. What we do know is that Europeans who arrived in North America during this early 16th century, so that's the 1500s, carried deadly diseases that infected whole tribes and set off a pandemic that destroyed entire villages and cultures, and with them evidence of the inhabitants, who they were, and how they lived. So the diseases that the native populations were not immune to were very devastating. Some farming communities did develop, the first in an unlikely region, the arid Southwest. So we're talking the Southwest United States Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah. They were hunters, but then they began to cultivate corn. And one of the interesting things about the ancestral Pueblo, also called the Anasazi, were the cities that they built into cliffs. Here we have the cliff-dwelling picture here on the right side. They also irrigated their fields and built low walls and diverted water from their winter rains and summer thunder showers for irrigation of their corn and other vegetables. Another cultural group in early American history, before it was even America, were the Mississippian mound builders. And as you some may surmise, the Mississippian mound builders were around villages around the Mississippi River. And one of the interesting notable facts about the Mississippian mound builders are the mounds that they built. That's why hence the name Mississippian mound builders. Okay, let's see here. As it says, they began to build mounds to bury tribal leaders. The Hopewell built more elaborate mounds. Thousands of their mounds have been discovered throughout the Midwest and as far east as modern-day North Carolina and New York. Archaeologists have found evidence of Hopewell's trade with people as far away as Wyoming and Florida. Another civilization called the Mississippian built a large city at Cahokia, Illinois. After 400 years of growth, Cahokia became a city of perhaps 20,000 people, about the same size as London at the time. The city, protected by a stockade, was surrounded by hundreds of acres of corn. The remains of enormous temples, elegant homes, and luxurious jewelry suggest that Cahokia was a society of noblemen, politicians, and priests. And that is the end of this first lesson. So, going back to the goals for this lesson, recognize the major theories and how people came to inhabit North and South America. That would be crossing over the Bering Land Strait from Asia to Alaska and then further down into North and South America. Identify methods used by archaeologists and historians to piece together a past, looking for remains of the cities, things that they hunted with, so on and so forth. And describe characteristics of the earliest cultures of North America. Two of the main ones described here were the Anasazi, the cliff dwellers in the southwest, and the Mississippian mound builders in the middle of the country around the Mississippi River. Now let's go to the next lesson, 1.04, to read a little bit about the first Americans. Okay, the first thing we need to do in this lesson is complete the Native American Culture Groups activity. And then we're going to click on here, because that's where we're going to find it. Okay, at one time, at least 12,000 years ago, there were no people in North America. And then it talks about how they crossed the Bering Land Bridge and settled into the land. And we're going to read about by 1500, when Europeans began to explore the continent, North America was inhabited by millions of people living in hundreds of different tribes. Historians and geographers divide these tribes into 7 regions based on the similarities in their environments and cultures. And we're going to read about and learn about these 7 different areas. So I'm going to start over here in the Northeast. This Native American culture group used the many rivers, lakes, and thousands of miles of coastline as means of transportation. Long cold winters often interrupted food supply, and that is indeed the Northeast. Excellent. Okay, what about the Southeast area? This Native American culture group enjoyed warm weather and abundant natural resources. They fished in the waters of the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic Ocean. Well, we know this is the Southeast. Very good. Now let's go in the middle. This Native American culture group hunted bison in a large region between the Rocky Mountains and the Mississippi River. This is the Great Plains area in the middle of the country. Let's look here in the Southwest. This Native American culture group lived west of the Rocky Mountains in an arid region. I said it was Southwest, it's going to be Southwest. In the middle here, this Native American culture group lived in the lands that are now Nevada and Utah. This is the Great Basin. This Native American culture group met much of their needs by fishing in the waters of the Pacific Ocean. Pacific Ocean, Pacific Coast, yes. And last group, this Native American culture group relied heavily on the ample water and fish provided by the Columbia River. Columbian Plateau. Your next task is to add information. Okay, and then we would need to write down information, but we're not going to go through all those steps today because we just want to get to the heart and soul. Let's go through the highlights from this lesson. And there is more to read about if you are interested in this topic. It's called the Chapter 1 Summary that you find under Lesson Resources. And it really goes through very much more in depth than that little activity about each of those regions that we just clicked on in the map. So that's more an area where you can find more information if you are interested. But the highlights here: nomadic hunter-gatherers crossed the Beringian landmass from Asia to North America. That's an important fact to remember, how they came to settle in the North American and South American continent. Okay. As hundreds of different tribes spread across the North American continent, they adjusted to the specific conditions of the places of which they settled. Oh, I forgot to highlight this as well. Many early Native American tribes left no written record and were wiped out before Europeans were able to make observations about their culture. Disease was probably the biggest contributing factor for wiping out many of their tribes. Because when Europeans came with those diseases they were not immune to, it was very devastating. Okay, within broadly similar environments, people adapted in similar ways, and historians have grouped similar cultures into geographic regions, like the Pacific Coast Group, the Southwest, Great Plains, etc. Okay, and then there was a checkpoint at the end of this, but we're not going through that at this time. All right, we're going to try to go through one more lesson, 1.05, the North American continent. Okay, this is going to be covering a lot of geography, physical features of North America, to kind of just reinforce those concepts. Let's see, lesson resources. There are no lesson resources. It's all in the lesson today. So we're going to click on some of these plus signs and see what pops up. Okay, here in the Great Lakes region, the 5 lakes that comprise the Great Lakes, whoops, stay there, it's not staying, form the world's largest group of freshwater lakes. They were formed about 10,000 years ago when meltwater from the receding ice sheet filled up basins that glaciers had carved. The Appalachian Mountain Range is an old range. They extend from central Alabama in the United States to southeastern Canada. So we're looking there, that's the Appalachian Mountain Range. This area in Florida, the Atlantic and Gulf coastal plains are flat lowlands that lie along the Atlantic Ocean and Gulf of Mexico, respectively. They are generally wet, include many rivers. The land is used for agriculture. The Mississippi River and its tributaries drain 41% of the 48 contiguous states of the United States. This drainage basin, the third largest in the world, empties into the Gulf of Mexico right here. The central lowland stretches between the Appalachian Mountains west to the Great Plains, so this area kind of right in here. It includes the states of Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, and Missouri. This region is part of America's Midwest and supplies the nation with corn and other grains. The Rocky Mountains were formed during the late Cretaceous period about 80 million years ago. They stretch from New Mexico-Texas border to British Columbia, very long. The Columbia Plateau region lies across parts of the states of Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. This wide plateau is located between the Cascade and Rocky Mountains. The Great Basin is an arid region, that means dry, that lies between the Wasatch Mountains in Utah and the Sierra Nevada in California. This region has no natural outlet to the sea. Much of the Great Basin consists of a series of isolated mountain ranges and valleys, one of the most sparsely inhabited areas of the United States. And finally, the Mojave Desert. It's named after the Mojave tribe and covers an area of over 22,000 square miles. They are generally defined by the presence of Joshua trees, an indicator species for the desert. Okay, now looking at the climate. Okay, the Pacific Northwest has a marine west coast climate, thick forest with tall trees, area that's suitable for farming and cultivating trees for lumber. The Mediterranean climates have 2 seasons, a cool, rainy, and a warmer, dry summer. Along the southern coast of California, a good place for growing crops. Lower portion of the Rocky Mountains have the same climate as the surrounding area, but going